So Max made a tweet about the state of Momentum yesterday, and it got people talking. He essentially said the current Dragonflight version of Momentum is bad, and the older versions were better because it wasn't treated as a maintenance buff. While I agree with him in a sense, I think there's more to consider and come to terms with when you really look at how Momentum works now. There's also a massive misunderstanding amongst the community about what Momentum is and what that gameplay looks like now. So let's dive into this and clear some things up once and for all. Momentum has had this stigma around it for as long as I've played the class. It's a very high skill cap playstyle that only the best players can pull off, and if you mess it up, you'll do negative damage. It will also rob you of all the amazing mobility we get as demon hunters, and you'll definitely die to all the mechanics because now your Fel Rush is on cooldown all the time. Now, I never understood this excuse because there's so many other classes out there who don't have an off GCD 15-yard nitro boost to get out of things. Ret Paladins and Death Knights seem to manage just fine. Not to mention we have Glide, which actually makes us move in a direction faster than natural run speed. Now, oddly enough, the people making this argument seem to have forgotten that we've played with Unbound Chaos for the majority of Shadowlands, and even towards the end of BFA. It could be argued that talent is even more impactful than Momentum in big AoE situations. Using movement for damage has always been a staple for Havoc Demon Hunters in some form or another. It's just gone unnoticed or unrecognized if the discussion wasn't focused solely on the talent Momentum. We've had Unbound Chaos in the more recent past, and even if Momentum was completely deleted right now, we'd still be playing around Vengeful Retreat and Initiative. In terms of being a high skill cap playstyle, I also don't think this is exactly true. Sure, it was something you had to pay attention to. You wanted to track when you had the buff and when it was going to fall off. But let's be honest, how much did BFA and Shadowland versions of Havoc really need to track? Where the difficulty lies for most was learning the timings of the encounter and the appropriate times to use their Fel Rush to get momentum. This forced a certain level of awareness into the gameplay, which was super satisfying once you had it all figured out. That advanced awareness is something that most classes need to learn early on, but the most commonly used Havoc builds didn't require it. And this is where we run into the first of the major problems. Havoc has had a large quantity of players who were drawn to the fact that it was a simple playstyle. They picked it up because the rotation was easy. Well, I mean, there was no rotation, you basically just pressed your abilities as they came up off cooldown like whack-a-mole, but that's besides the point. You weren't required to track anything or really pay attention to much. It was a casual player's ultimate dream class to pick up and start killing things with. But here's my hot take. It stifled their growth potential as players. Havoc always got by and did more than acceptable damage with very little effort, so there was really no reason for those players to attempt to learn and become better, other than their own curiosity. A lot of those players didn't think they were missing anything. I mean, how do you know what you don't know, right? And I can say this because I was one of these people. I was terrified of anything that asked me to do more than I already was. It wasn't until I started Mythic raiding and making Havoc content on the internet that I faced that uncertainty head on and began to learn because I wanted to get better and to help others. Now as the class is evolving and morphing into a situation where you need to focus on your abilities and the encounter mechanics at the same time, like most other classes do, these players are being hit with a rude awakening about how the game expects you to play at higher levels. So this is ultimately how Momentum ended up with such a bad reputation and unfortunately pinned the able and unable players against each other. If you guys can think of a more divisive talent in the game, please go ahead and let me know in the comments because I think this one takes the cake. If you browse the forums or pay attention in Discord servers, you'll probably see people saying things like, delete Momentum. While that opinion is totally fair to have, there's often a confusion on the terminology. Some people mean just the talent Momentum. Others mean delete the whole row of talents starting from Initiative. I feel that it's very important to not only be clear on your stance, but to also add more to the conversation than a brief delete Momentum. Describe exactly what you don't like, how it makes you feel, and at the very least, come forward with a solution. Alright, so how has Momentum changed? What's different about it now to even spark Max to make that tweet, or me to make this video? Well, its function has changed, for good and for bad. It's now a 5-second buff for 8% damage that is applied by more abilities than just Fel Rush. It's also applied by the Hunt and Vengeful Retreat, so this is the good portion of the change. We no longer have to rely on our crutch movement abilities to give us damage. It's applied by other sources that just so happen to be included in our rotation. At level 70, we'll almost certainly be playing a build that includes both of our stat scaling talents, Know Your Enemy, and Any Means Necessary. To get Know Your Enemy, we have to work our way down the left side of the tree, picking up things like Initiative, Unbound Chaos, Tactical Retreat, and Essence Break. Momentum is right along that path. By having all those talents, particularly Essence Break, our damage profile becomes less about sustained damage like it was in BFA or Shadowlands. And because it was sustained back then, this is why we felt like we needed to keep momentum up as much as possible. Our damage profile now is all about the bursty Essence Break window every 40 seconds. Actually using the abilities to properly execute an Essence Break window will automatically give you the momentum buff for that window. So you would use, for example, the Hunt, which gives you momentum, then you would I-Beam, then you would Vengeful Retreat, which gives you momentum and Essence Break at the same time. Then you could potentially Fel Rush back in, that gives you momentum. Then you fill your Essence Break window, Death Sweep, Annihilation, and so on. Simply doing that short burst window guarantees that you have the momentum buff every 40 seconds during the moments that you actually need it. The talent basically plays itself. You don't have to track it, you don't need to worry about keeping optimal uptime, none of that. It just kind of happens. So you're probably asking, what about in between those windows? And hey, that's a valid question. You're already going to be using Vengeful Retreat as often as you can due to initiative. So that ability is on a 20-second cooldown, so you're going to get momentum again there. Because you're getting initiative and momentum at the same time by using that ability, that's when you'd want to use whatever hard-hitting ability you have ready at the time. Other than that, sure, you could Fel Rush to get the buff, but there were actually some in-depth investigations with Sims and adjusting the APL, which discovered that the difference between utilizing momentum as a passive or actively using Fel Rush to keep it up during downtime was a difference of like 1%. This is simply because you get momentum naturally when you need it the most, during your Essence Break windows. So now you might be thinking, okay, this is great, I don't have to worry about it anymore. But there's actually a deeper problem to ponder now. What's the point of the talent if it doesn't encourage any difference in your gameplay? You could literally play the build the exact same way, not alter the abilities you press in any fashion, and you'd simply just be doing 8 to 9% less damage than if you had it. And this is the root of the problem. The talent has been gutted and changed so much to the extent that it's simply a damage increase talent where if you don't take it, you're setting yourself at a very clear and obvious damage differential. So it's just going to be baked in, locked in, set it and forget it for the decided build at level 70 when we have that many points to play with. I have two closing statements on momentum that I'd like to make. 1. You don't have to be afraid of momentum. It's not that scary monster you might remember it being. It's not going to force you to use all your Fel Rush charges and make you die in the fire. It just doesn't work that way anymore. And 2, it just doesn't work that way anymore. It doesn't work in any way, really. It's lost its character, its potential for engaging gameplay. It was chosen to stay in the new Dragonflight talent trees because it was such a contentious talent. People loved it, or loved to hate it, which resulted in it actually being a choice you had to make. Unfortunately, there's no choice anymore and you're just doing less damage if you don't take it, regardless of how casual or hardcore you are as a player. But I like to think of it this way. The high skill cap burst window that momentum used to provide has just simply been shifted and moved into Essence Break. And I'm totally cool with that. If you guys like this video, give it a like, let me know your opinions in the comments, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.